I've seen a lot. Amid the celebrity allure of entrepreneurship, many exceptional entrepreneurs remain shadowed. Here, I team up with these hidden talents to unveil their challenges and successes. Dive in with me to unearth entrepreneurial gems, learn from our experiences, and get educated. Hi, buddy. What's going on, man? I am fortunate enough to be in Texas with one of my best friends, Tim Reynolds, Dr. Tim Reynolds, who, well, we've known each other for, decade and a half, but, we travel together as family. We have, a very close bond. And Tim, started Special Forces, became an ER doctor, created a urgent care empire here. But businessman, very successful businessman. And then that really just scratches the surface of what you are, Tim. Extreme family man, 5 kids, split family, and manages it to the highest degree. There's not enough words that I could say about, clearly one of my best friends, on the earth, and I'm so grateful, to be down here in Texas at your farm or ranch.
If you have cattle, you're a ranch. If you have crops, you're a farm.
Right. And so, and up in Canada, you're just a farm. So, but dude, I'm so blessed to be here. I'm blessed to have a conversation with you. There's a million ways that this thing could go. I warn the listeners right now.
It's going to be hilarious.
You guys do, with your wife and you do relationship coaching and programs for that. You have programs for, actually, that my son went through called a gladiator program. So, I mean, honestly, it is unbelievable, all the things that you've accomplished. Wrote a book called Living Every Minute. It's on Audible. We will talk about that later, I'm sure. But so let's get rolling, dude. What's on your mind? What is happening?
I'm also very grateful you're here in Texas. It's been a long time coming. We've tried a couple of times and the weather and crap wouldn't let it happen, but we got here this time. And the check is that I wrote for you for the intro is waiting. But don't cash it for a couple of weeks, please.
Yeah, it's gonna bounce. Yeah. One thing I forgot to mention was just in the past year and a bit, you have, a couple of years, a year and a half now, right?
Yeah, it'd be 21 months. Yeah.
21 months. Dr. Reynolds, or Tim, I'm going to call you Tim from here on.
Either way.
Got a thing called Goodpasture's disease, affected his kidney, had to get a kidney replacement. So you have actually swung the whole gamut from it's amazing. You were on death's door, literally.
Literally.
The success rate is probably not greater than 10% from Goodpasture's disease. So you literally, were on death's door, and that was, very unnerving, obviously, for, your family and us as well. But so when you look at it, it's interesting watching you go through this transition, of, I would say, a track record of unbelievable success in, if you were the 3 pillars, the personal, the business, and the real intimate relationships, you're ticking all the boxes and you're operating at an unbelievable high level. And all of a sudden, wham, you face this scenario where, death is imminent. And then how that changes perspective. So let's get started and let's talk to me about where you're at.
Yeah. So I got the kidney transplant 21 months ago, got sick about 9 months before that. So I got sick in December of 21, got the kidney transplant in July of 2022 and been recovering from that. They happened to accidentally paralyze my leg during the kidney surgery. So I had that to deal with as well. So it's been a hell of a 2 years, to be honest with you. But amidst all the trouble and trials and difficulty, there were a lot of grace and a lot of blessings that happened along the way too, which is just kind of how life works, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, just to frame, you're what, 61?
61.
Now? 61. So
I know it's hard to believe because I look like 30. Right?
Literally look like 34. Literally. But I'm interested in really kind of because we've got a lot of listeners, in that pocket, business people or successful career people or people who are looking to, grow business. So we'll talk a lot about that. But I'm just curious, like in the outset right now, what were the biggest learnings? What were the takeaways? What were the distinctions that went, holy shit?
The crazy thing is, because I get asked that a lot, as you can imagine, right? And I think as I think about it, the craziest part is that it's not like I hadn't been through hard times before. Thank goodness. I mean, my mental, physical, and spiritual capabilities leading into that were high enough that I had a lot of reserves left. And we talked about this last night because I needed them all. I needed all the tools that I had. I needed all the tools that I've learned over the years to try and keep my meditation the way it needed to be, keep my spirituality the way it needed to be, keep my physical self the way it needed to be, although that got taken from me. But I think along the way, what I learned was not necessarily a new lesson, but an emphasis on things that I already knew up here that moved to here, right? I mean, we all say, well, my most important thing is my family. I all of us say that. But man, when you're leaving and this might be the last day, that has a whole different meaning. Like literally nothing else matters. Not the career, not the successes, not the cars. Nothing else matters except, can I spend one more day with the kids? That's the only thing. And so and we've all said it, we always say it all the time, but it takes it to a different meaning when now I'm actually facing that this could possibly it. And so I think there was a lot of learning about the stuff I'd always said was the most important actually became in my physical being and what I did day to day the most important. And I've tried to keep that.
Just reflecting on that, because most people say that, and depending on where you are in your life,
Sure.
if you're 30 years old right now, you're like, I don't have kids, fuck that shit. Like I'm driving, I'm trying to build my business, or I'm do whatever it is that you're doing. But but what we also say it about our health, or we'll say it about whatever family. I'm curious, at what level did you when you look back at now, it's like, man, there was a level where I was maybe not lying to myself, but exaggerating it and not fully being aware of it and fully knowing. And then what was the vulnerability in the moment?
Well, I think what happens when you get sick, and everybody who's listening who's been sick will, I think, appreciate this, is all of your ego gets stripped away. I mean, people are coming in, changing your shit, and you can't do anything for yourself, and people have to feed you, and people have to take care of you. And I am not the kind of person, if you look at my history, who's ever had anybody take care of me, nor did I ever want to have anybody take care of me. But when that has to happen, when everything gets stripped away, and all you have left is what's left of that, what is that? What is that thing that's left, right? When all of your ego is taken away, when your physicality, which I've always been very proud of in my life, gets taken away, what do you have left? That's the real you. That's who there is underneath of all of that. And so you get to I at least got to know that person a little bit better, of who that person really was, stripped away from all of the world, I want to say worldly, but world stuff that we think is so important, suddenly didn't have any meaning whatsoever.
And what was that? Like, what was that? Who was that person? Like, what did you discover in that moment?
I think and again, I want to tell people, wow, there was this moment during when I was sick that I realized this thing and this light came down and told me, but that's not the way it worked for me. The way it worked for me is every single day I kind of learned a new thing and thought, I used to think that was so important. Turns out that's not that important to me, right? It turns out, yes, being physical, going to the gym, doing that stuff, I still did it even during the time I was sick, the whole time I was sick, but not because it was as important as I had made it in the past, but because it was a way to stay as healthy as I possibly could so I could do the most important thing, which was be able to take care of my family. I mean, honestly, I keep saying family, but in my life, that's what is the most important. And so that became, my career has been amazing. I've been 33 years a physician. I've, run businesses. I've taken care of thousands of sick people, dying people, dead people over the years. And all of that's great. But all of that suddenly really didn't have any meaning in the last one. I really thought this could be it.
Which is a crazy, when I hear you say that, and I mean, you're a doc, so your identity is, or a piece of your identity, and you've been pretty good to manage it, but I know a lot of other doctors and their identity can get really wound up. And I actually have never met a doctor, and I have tons of doctor friends, but I've never met a doctor who's saved more lives on the street than you. Like it's insane how many stories you actually have of like somebody goes down of a heart attack and you just happen to be there at the Broadway show. And it's insane the stories you have about that. So like you get your identity tied up being a doctor or whatever it is, a business owner or whatever. And I'm using you as an example, but we all get our identity tied up into stuff. And then that gets stripped away. And then it's like in that moment you just said, it's like, I realized like all that stuff didn't matter or it didn't matter near as much as I thought it did.
That didn't matter at all.
Which is crazy because we live our lives every day thinking our business matters, our job matters, putting food on the table for our kids matters. You hear the stories, hey, the kids they don't care whether you make $2 million or $200,000 or $50,000. Like, but we sell ourselves on the journey, and which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing either, because
you have to have a rounded life. And I'm not downplaying that. Right. I'm just saying that when you strip it all away, and you think about this, if you had no businesses, if I took them all away from you today, and you didn't have this podcast, who are you? What's underneath all of that?
Yeah, for me, I think it's I could actually answer that. It's like it's the reason why I do the podcast. I certainly don't do it because I want to be famous or known or anything like that, because it's the opposite. That's the piece not that I am known, but that I don't like about it. But it's like I'd be the person that gives, cares, loves, wants to contribute, wants to make other people's lives better, wants to make my own life better, wants to grow, push myself. And if it all left, I just keep doing what I have done.
And I agree with you. And I do think that truly is who you are. And if you couldn't do any of those things, who are you? If you couldn't contribute, if you couldn't help others, if you didn't have the ability anymore because of either illness or whatever, and you couldn't do any of those things, then who are you? It is. And that's the position I was in. I couldn't leave my house. And so I'm that person too. I'm always building. I'm always thinking of how can I make other things more spectacular for other people. And I suddenly was unable to do that. Or certainly not in the way that I had been able to in the past. And so I had to rethink what that really meant to me.
Yeah. So when you say it like that, it creates a lot of levity to it. Like
it was.
And that's a really great, I think. So now that you've been through it, where do you find yourself and how do you balance that realization, and what was the learning or the takeaways or the next steps that you'd be working on going forward to?
So for me, it was coming to peace with, that moment. I want to sound like Stephen Covey here for a minute because I don't approach Stephen Covey, but coming to the Stephen Covey moment where if I'm by myself, I am completely at peace with who I am now. Where I think for your whole life, you're struggling trying to improve that guy or make that guy better or do a better thing, or am I really all I should be or could have be, or all of those things. I am content completely with who I am, with everything I have, all the blessings that I have, all the family that I have, all of those things, and completely content if I don't have any of those things. All of that goes away, just with who I am as a spirit, if you want to say it that way, an energy, whatever your belief in that is, I'm content just with that as well. And I get pleasure and contentment and happiness and significance maybe from helping others and making other people's lives better and creating things and growing things, but I don't have to have that anymore. I had to have it before. I thought that's who I was. And it turns out that's on top of who you already are.
Yeah, that's
which is deep.
It is. That is deep. I mean, and
well, I sat there for a lot of hours. I couldn't do anything else. So, and that is part of the problem. We're so busy, we don't have time to think like that. We're busy. I mean, I'm busy again now. I don't think like that now, but for that time, the blessing was I got time to just really think about that.
And do you take any time now for yourself to think about that stuff? Like, I know, like, one of the things that I picked up from you actually over the years is, like, I don't start my day until 10 a.m. I don't take a meeting until 10 a.m.
You don't interact with other people.
Yeah. I told my sister that once, that I don't start my day till 10 a.m. And then
be nice.
So no, she was like, when my dad passed away, like, we were going through a bunch of stuff, and she would, like, text me and email me, between, like, 9 o'clock in the morning, 8 to 10. And she'd be, like, firing off a bunch of questions. And I'm like, fuck, like, because that's where I do my think time. It's where I do all the important things. And
all
so
the quadrant
I kind
2
of,
stuff.
Yeah, I kind of, like, unpolitely kind of ripped back at her and went, what's with all the questions? She's like, well, you told me you didn't start your day until 10. So I thought it was the perfect
getting
time.
Started. get you going early while nobody else is bugging you.
Right. So it's like, yeah, so it's not,
So when I made that rule, gosh, what's it been, 10 years ago now, something like that?
I think so, yeah.
And I let everybody know. I said, I won't have a meeting before 10 o'clock. They go, well, that must be nice. I like, it will be, but not in the way you think. I'm not sleeping till 9:30. I'm doing some stuff that's very, very important to me and my family, and nobody's going to know what that is but me. And so the second you make that decision, everybody tests it. Doc, I know you don't start till 10, but the only time these guys can meet is at 8:30. Well, then they won't be meeting with me. Well, this is the only time they're going to be in town. They're leaving. I'm like, sorry about that. And everybody tests it. And then after they test it for about 6 months, then nobody ever talks about it again. In fact, they'll say, oh, he doesn't do that till 10 o'clock. Because the world is exactly what you tell it to be. If that's what you tell the world it is, then the world goes, oh, I guess that's what it is. My favorite example of that is my buddy, Famous Dave Anderson. I don't know if you know who he is, but Famous Dave started and owned a restaurant called Famous Dave's Barbecue. 180 locations nationwide, super successful, Native American, really, really great guy. Was an alcoholic for years. Now he's been sober for like 30 years. And he talks a lot about that in the Native American community because that's a real problem. Mega successful. So the first time I meet Famous Dave, I'm at an authors conference in Las Vegas, and I'm sitting in the audience, and I see him, and they're talking about him. And I really didn't know who he was then either. But they're talking about how great he is and all these things he's done, these books he's written, and what a great man he is. And I'm like, I got to meet this guy. I got to meet Famous Dave. So he goes to the bathroom. I slip up and walk into this great story because this happened. So I go in the bathroom, and I'm like, hey. And he's like, I was like, Famous Dave. I was like, so I get like 2, because at the time I had 2 clinics. I said, I get the 2. How do I turn 2 into 180? He goes, you really want to know the answer? I said, yeah. And he said, cost you 20 grand. I said, what? And he goes, $20,000. I'll tell you the answer to that. I was like, done. That's cheapest 20 grand I'll ever spend. Mm-hmm. He goes, come up to my room. So my saying is, I met him in the bathroom. We went straight to his room. And that is true, but not the way it sounds. So we go up to his room, and he pulls out a legal pad. And I'm very new in business at the time. And he pulls out a legal pad, and he says, okay, tell me what your values are. Tell me what your mission statement is. What is your this? What is your this? He's going through all these questions about my business. I could only answer about 10% of them because, he's got 180. He's already worked all this out. I haven't even thought about a lot of the questions he's asking me. He's writing all this stuff on the legal pad, which is, think about how generous that is of this guy, right? He doesn't even know me. We've never met before. And so we're going through all this. And he said, you ever been to a Famous Dave's? I said, no, sir. I don't know what that is. He says, it's, my restaurant. I said, no, I've never been to one. He goes, come on. So there's one in Vegas. So he drives us over. We go to this Famous Dave's in Vegas. He walks in, and it's like Brad Pitt walked into the place. It's like his pictures everywhere, right? And suddenly he's walking into of the 180 restaurants, they're freaking out.
His staff or
the waitresses, everybody knew who he was, right? Because he's very, very famous. Turns out famous Davis famous. So then that's the part of the story I'm getting to. So we're sitting there eating, and I said, well, let me ask you a question. He goes, what's that? And I said, why do they call you Famous Dave? And he goes, interesting story. He goes, one day I was reading some self-help book, and he goes, and I thought to myself, Dave's a boring name. What I should be called is Famous Dave. So I started calling myself Famous Dave, and so did everybody else. And he said, and that's how the world works. Whatever you tell it to do, that's what it does. And he's been Famous Dave ever since. And that was my same experience with the 10 a.m. thing. I was like, once I told everybody, they tested for a while, and then everyone was like, well, that's the way it is. That's the way it's always been. It's very interesting how many times the world does that. You and I talked about last night when I was sick on some of the things I went through. I was like, no, that's not the way that's going to be. And I just kept saying very calmly. And then the world moves to what you say it's going to be. It's a bizarre concept.
Yeah, actually. So I have two questions there, but before we leave.
Oh, and by the way, Famous Dave never charged me a dime. So I said, what about the 20 grand? He goes, that was just see how serious you were. He never charged me a dime. In fact, he invited me to his house. We become great friends. He lives in Minneapolis. He's a wonderful man, has great charities. And actually, because of that interaction, his son ran a course called Leadership from the Heart, which trains leaders in businesses. We had them come down to us, and I've put 150 people through his course now. So it all led to another thing, which led to another thing. So it's pretty crazy.
What's his son's name?
I'll think of it here in a second. Last name's Anderson.
Leadership from the Heart.
Yeah.
Though. Yeah. Sorry, before we jump off the whole medical thing and your kidney and all that kind of stuff, I think it's interesting just for people to hear from a doctor how, like fairly quickly, like you were explaining this last night, how you managed your care and how important it is for people to understand that they need to manage their care. And do you want to just share a little bit about that story?
I think that's going to be the new book that I'm trying to write now, but I just haven't had time, is this experience that I went through. Because I've been a physician. I've taken care of tons of patients in and out of the hospital. But being on the other side of it for the first time, there was some enlightenment. But I would say that the message I would have for anybody listening, the number one thing is you have to take responsibility for your health care. Nobody else is going to do it for you. You're going to go through different doctors, different nurses, different specialists along the way, but you're the only person who's consistently in all of that. And I'm not saying they don't care, but they could never have the care that you do, right? I mean, you're one of 40 patients he's seeing today, right? And you're one of, 8 patients she has in the ICU today. And so the only person who can really manage your healthcare is you. And if you don't know, so I would say if you get really sick and you don't know anything about medicine, so I had the advantage of knowing about medicine, but if you don't know anything about medicine, find an advocate who does. Because you really need somebody who's only on your side to kind of guide, especially if you're really sick. You have a chronic illness, you have cancer, you have an autoimmune disease, something that's going to last a while. You really need to have somebody who's helping you to navigate that. And I'm telling you, they make it difficult, not just on the medical side, but my gosh, in the U.S. at least, probably not the same in Canada, the insurance stuff you have to go through, the disabilities. I mean, it was the mounds of paperwork. Here you are sick and also trying to navigate through all of that at the same time. You really need somebody who can kind of be by your side and help you through all of that.
Yeah, well, and then it's a lack of access. And we have, like for Canada anyways, we have an overrun system. So you have lack of access and, you've got to somehow figure out how to get yourself up the priority list. And if you talk like you don't know what you're talking about, then they know they can just kind of move you.
You'll just be part of the system.
Part of the system.
They tried to do that to me here. I told you the stories last night. They would say, this is the way we always do it. And I said, well, it's not the way we're doing it this time. In my case, we're doing a different thing. Home dialysis, what we talked about last night. There's a thing where I had to be on dialysis for 9 months. And I started in the hospital. And the traditional way is when you finish dialysis, you go to a dialysis center 3 days a week for the next however long, maybe your whole life. Some people, their whole life. If you're lucky enough to get a transplant, which is about a 4.5-year deal, then you go to the dialysis center until you qualify for a transplant. And if you're still healthy enough, then maybe you get the transplant. And I said, that's not the way I'm doing this. I said, I'm going to do dialysis at home, and I'm getting a transplant this year. And they just kind of blew me off. And I said, no, you don't understand. I am not going to a dialysis center. And they're like, well, that's what has to happen. I'm like, well, it's not what's going to happen. I said, so tell me what I have to do not to. And I just have to keep saying it over and over to multiple people. I'm not doing that. We're doing a different thing. And finally, they, it's just like the 10 a.m. after the resistance finally gave down. Then they're like, all right, let's find a way to make him happy because he's not going to leave us alone if we don't. And then guess what? I came home, did it at home, and got a machine here, and did it 9 months later, got a transplant, just like I told them I was going to do.
Yeah, and you made it happen, and you made it happen. I would say, like, knowing the story intimately, you made it happen not necessarily because you're a doctor. You made it happen because you've lived your life making shit happen.
No, it didn't have anything to do with being a doctor.
It was the buildup of the muscle.
Yes.
Of going.
That's not the way we're doing it.
Yeah.
We're going to do it a different way.
Same in your business.
I'm not mad at you.
Yep.
I'm not angry, but that's not the way it's going to happen.
There's another way.
There's another way, and we're going to do it this other way.
Yeah. Not taking, it's like the Walt Disney
did the
approach
research
to
myself. I mean, to be honest, I'm a physician, but I didn't know jack about dialysis. Right? I don't take care of dialysis patients. That's a whole realm I didn't know anything about. The only time I ever saw a dialysis patient if somebody came in the ER and they happened to be a dialysis patient. And so I didn't know anything about it. So I literally sat in the ICU reading everything I could about kidney function. But it wasn't because I was a doctor. Anybody could have read what I was reading. I was just reading about how to treat. I wasn't reading from a doctor's standpoint. I was reading from a patient standpoint. As a patient, what's in my best interest? And it became very obvious reading that home dialysis was better and the kidney transplant was way better. So I was like, well, I'm doing home dialysis and I'm getting a kidney transplant. The second I read both of those things, I was like, well, that's my mantra. I can have a 5-year survival rate of 30% staying on dialysis, or I can have a 5-year survival rate of 90% getting a transplant.
Which actually, talk about the transplant for a sec, because, there was, you could be put on a transplant list and, 4 years later, hopefully you get a transplant or whatever it is.
So somebody dies and you happen to be on the list.
Right.
Yeah.
But you took a different approach.
It ain't happening. I said, the best way to get a transplant is to find somebody willing to give you a kidney. And so I said, I'm going to reach out to everybody I know and say, guys, I need a kidney. And that's a humbling experience because that's not asking for $5. That's asking for an organ, right? That's a big deal. And so we just put it out there and said, I had Pam do all this, and she said, Tim's going to need a kidney. And, we're really hoping somebody will be happy to help us and step up. And we had 37 people who offered me a kidney. 37 people actually got in the system. There was actually more than that, but 37 people, and they'd never seen that before. I'm still to this day, I get choked up talking about it. It's hard to believe that I have 37 friends who are willing to give me an organ. It's crazy.
And I would have given you one, but it would have killed you.
Well, I would have been drunk all the time.
I didn't make it past the first 10 questions. I submitted my name. I think they sent a questionnaire, and I didn't get past
I appreciate
the
that.
initial question.
But the fact that you were willing, that's the point. There are a lot of people that happen to, right? People who had diseases, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact they were even willing to ask that question. I had a friend who has pancreatic cancer, and he's had it for 2 years, and he's, pancreatic cancer is a terminal disease, and he knows that. And he tried to give me his kidney. And he's like, Tim, there's nothing wrong with my kidneys. I'm going to die anyway. Just take my kidney. They wouldn't take it because he has pancreatic cancer. But man, just him calling me with that phone call was just like, wow. Yeah.
Well, so it's a testament to you and who you are and what you give to people. So I'll just say that. But it's also a testament to, back to the conversation, is you have got to control your own destiny.
You have to control it.
And whether you're in your own business or whether you are in a intimate relationship, like if you think your intimate relationship is just going to last forever,
you're wrong.
At the same level,
you're wrong.
You are a fucking fool.
You're wrong.
And so you've got to manage your own destiny when it comes to that. And that's what you did. You just went out and said, hey, I'm not going to get on a waiting list. I'm going to create my own list.
If I were going to summarize our 3 days couple course, maybe we'll talk about relationships later. That's what I'd say we teach. The teaching is you can do nothing about it and watch it fade, or you can do everything about it and watch it grow. Your choice. But you can't do nothing about it and watch it grow. That's not going to happen.
Actually, Tennille and I just had a coaching.
We both know that. We've both been on both sides of that.
Both sides.
Both of us have. And so it's 100% true.
Yeah. And, Tennille, I was just going to say, Tennille and I just had a coaching conversation with someone, and I said, like, what are you guys doing? Well, we're talking to a counselor, and, you listen to what the counselor's going to put them through, like once every 2 weeks. It's like once every 2 weeks. That's 26 conversations a year about your relationship. Like,
not going to make it.
Yeah, you're not going to make it. If it's the most important thing, like what would you do if your business was dying?
Would you just do it every 2 weeks?
Every day.
Every 2 weeks you'd say it, talk about it?
Every 8 hours a day, you'd be in your business, or 15 or 12 or whatever many hours a day, you'd be working on whatever it is, lack of sales, marketing, customer service, execution, productivity, whatever it is that's plaguing your business. You would be focused on it completely.
100%.
And yet we don't do that in our personal relationship.
100%.
So
I love what Tony said one time. He said, how do you make love, have sex, whatever you want to say, with the same person for the rest of your life? Because it's a question guys ask each other all the time, right? And he said, let me ask you this question. How does Garth Brooks sing Friends in Low Places for the 30,000th time and it sounds better than he ever sang it before? And the answer to that question is because he's a fucking pro. That's what pros do. And if you're going to be a pro at something, be a pro at your relationship.
That's, great advice.
Genius, right?
It is genius.
Yeah.
It is.
I got to tell the other side of that, though, because it is a podcast and we have to be somewhat funny and we're way too serious so far. All right. So, ladies on a ranch, looking out the window at the cows. She looks at her husband. She goes, baby, look at that bull. He says, yeah. She says, he has sex with those cows every day. He says, yeah. And she says, why can't you be more like that bull? He looks at her and he says, well, does he have sex with the same cow? It's not all serious.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, God. Okay, I told you earlier I had two questions. I want to just roll back to the 10 o'clock thing because I don't want to let that escape. But do you mind sharing kind of what your rituals are in the morning? Because so many people get stuck at what I call in the human doing. They get up, they do bang, 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 and honestly, when I didn't take a meeting, when I started not taking a meeting till 10, it was a game changer for me. I resisted it. You talked about it, and I was like, oh fuck, like how the fuck, like I can't do that. I got shit to do. But it was game changer for me. I'm curious if you could share.
Sure. And I have an article I wrote about it back then that I haven't probably looked at that article in 8-9 years, but if you want me to, I'll find it and we'll send it out to everybody. They can take a look at it because I explain how I did it, how I thought of it, and how it changed my life. So I'm happy to do that. Yeah, I just need to find it. But for me, and it's changed over the years. When I first started it, I was in kindergarten. I didn't know what to do at that time exactly. I just knew that if I was going to improve my life, I had to have some time that was devoted to the most important things. And I was realizing that my life was the zombie life. Get up in the morning, grab your coffee, get to work, go through the day, come home, check out, have a couple beers, watch TV. And, it was never that extreme, but I call that zombie. That's what the life a lot of people live. And they never take the time to reflect, to think and say, I'm climbing the ladder of success, but I probably should take the time to say, is the ladder against the right wall? Because suddenly you get to the top and you go, well, shit, this isn't even the right ladder, And so I needed some time to think about, was I even on the right ladder? And I knew there was some things I wanted to do. I wanted to write a little bit. I wanted to read more. I wanted to learn. I wanted to meditate. I wanted to pray. I was already working out, but I wanted to have time for that. And how am I going to have time for all of that? When could I possibly have time for that? There's a book called the 5 a.m. Club. And they're like, well, if you get up at 5 a.m. before everybody else, 4 a.m., that's, I think, Dwayne Johnson, get up at 4 a.m. I'm like, yeah, I'm probably not going to do either of those two things. So I tried both of those two things, and I decided that's not my club. Because weirdly, I also like staying up till midnight. So it's hard. I've always said, being an ER doc, this is true. When you're ER, you're 24 hours because you work night shifts, day shifts, all this kind of thing. So I've always had a propensity to stay up late at night because of the life I lived for so long in special forces and medical school and residency and ER. Your nights are part of your life, right? So I love staying up late at night, and I love getting up in the morning. Turns out they're incompatible. You can't continue to stay up late at night. I did it in my early life, but
you can't sustain it.
You can't sustain it.
Yeah,
so you kind of got to pick, am I a late night guy or am I an early morning guy? And I've kind of found a balance between those two things. And so I'll stay up late at night, but I don't get up. I get up at 6 and, 6:30 sometimes. And so I thought, well, shit, if I'm getting up at 6:30, suddenly that 2 hour, 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. everybody talks about, I don't have. And now I got nothing. I've been working at 8. So I said, well, it's just a clock. We invented the clock. Why don't I just move it a little bit? That was literally my thinking. I'm like, why do I think time matters? That what time I do a thing doesn't matter. The fact the thing gets done is what matters. So I just shifted the clock and said, okay, well, if I'm going to get up at this time, I still need those times. And the time I'll be ending all the writing and meditation and the things that I want to do will be 10 o'clock. And that's when I'll be at work and take meetings, et cetera. So I really got to end about 9:15 so I get ready and go. So in retrospect, I'm kind of describing a 10-year process because, in the beginning, I wasn't sure. And then I started obsessing about the perfect morning routine. Like, what is the perfect morning routine? I got to meditate, and I got to get in the sauna, and I got to have the cold plunge, and I got to get a massage, and I got to read, and I got to, pretty soon you got 1,700 things that make the perfect morning routine.
Yeah, you're pushing your 10 in the afternoon.
I take no meetings till 4 p.m. and so I actually have kind of honed it over the years to say, all right, what do I really think is important during that time? And so I have a list, right? I do like to meditate. I do like to have some sauna time. I don't like cold plunges. I think those are retarded. Sorry, Joe. I think that.
Sorry, Joe.
Rogan.
Oh, Joe Rogan. I do cold plunges. Yeah. I love them.
I'm not going to hate them. Them. Yeah, and that's okay. Everybody has their thing, right?
Everything. That's right.
Yeah, and so and I did them for a while, but I think part of the problem is when I was in special forces and when I lived in Guatemala, I had to take a damn cold shower every morning for 4 years. Well, I don't want to take another cold shower ever again in my life. Nobody appreciates hot water more than Tim Reynolds. I love hot water. So I can do it. I just don't want to. And so, and people say, I'll make you live longer. I don't want to live any longer. I would rather have a hot shower. But I've done it. So like I said, I've rotated over things and over time, and that's kind of what it is. And so now what I do is I have a list of what I think the most important things are for me to do in that time when I'm alone in my B quadrants, and I'll rotate through those things. I give myself a little grace and go, okay, today I'd like to do this one, this one, and this one. But tomorrow I might change up and do these other ones. So today I might meditate, write a little bit, and do some reading, and then tomorrow listen to a course and get my workout in. And so they don't look the same every single day anymore. They used to, because I was obsessed with finding the perfect thing. And what I found is the perfect thing is being a little bit flexible in what are my needs for the perfect thing right now, so that they can so they're more changeable over time.
Is there core areas that you try to focus on, which is like, is it emotional? Is it mental? Is it growth? Is it?
So my 6 pillars are, and we teach this in the Gladiator course that we teach, is health, obviously, wealth, relationships, what I call sharpening the sword, which is mental, spiritual. And I think there's a lot of crossover between those two things. Where does mental end and spiritual starts, and spiritual end and mental starts? So I just call it mental, spiritual. And then what we call abundance, you might call contribution, or giving, or gratitude. Kind of those four things into one word I call abundance, right? The world is a very abundant place. Me recognizing that and being grateful for that and looking out to see how I can contribute to that and how I can help the world, I classify all that as abundance. So I might take, in my abundance time, I might take an hour and just meditate on gratitude. Or I might take an hour and write somebody a letter. That's the same thing to me. So that to me is abundance. It could be recognition, or it could be giving, all at the same time. So I don't separate gratitude and contribution. I kind of combine that into one thing called abundance.
So I have health, wealth, relationships, mental, spiritual, abundance. That's 5. You said, was there 6?
Yeah. So the last one is called, and the mental, spiritual, we call sharpening the sword. And then the last one I call leadership or mission. So leadership / mission, basically what that means is, what am I here to do? When I strip everything away, what am I on earth to do? And am I taking the time to work on that thing that I and only I was put here to do? What does that look like? So it also applies to some of all these are intermixed, obviously, right? You can't have mental without health and all those kinds of things. So they're intermixed. And in my mind, the mission / leadership is who needs leading. And this applies to my businesses, to my family. Am I being a good leader to my children? Am I being a good leader to my colleagues? Am I being a good leader in my community? What is my mission and how is that being fulfilled?
Yeah. So if you don't mind, maybe we can dive into these 6 pillars a little bit, because I think it's powerful, and just potentially how you apply this, because everybody's got a different strategy, right? And everything, and just like we just talked about cold plunging, not everything works for all people. And so the whole point of having, the podcast is to bring people on to share their experiences. And so I'd love to hear, kind of how you're integrating, or and also how you teach in your Gladiator course, these 6 pillars. How does health show up, and how would you do you take, each of these items and then thread them into, the other pillars of your life, whether it's personal, relationship, family? How does that look?
Yeah. So by the way, just last thing, I'm not knocking cold plunges. However, nobody in Greenland or Alaska or Antarctica does a cold plunge. Only people who live in warm places do cold plunges. To them, that's just called a bath.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's like walking in the rain.
Exactly. Yeah, everybody says, what? I love a good walk in the rain, unless you live in Seattle. Then you hate it. That's just called a walk.
Then you hate it. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are how I integrate. Those are my integration points. So to me, relationship is all about family and relationships and friends, and we could dive into each of these however you want to do it.
However you want to do it, dude. If you want, do you want to start with health? It's the first.
Well, health to me. So I've taken a lot of time to think about these. So it sounds like I've already thought about them. Well, that's because I've already thought about them. In fact, they're the same pillars in my book. So I've thought about them a lot. But health to me is, it's easy to say your health's important, but then I would ask you the question, yes, that's true. So what's important? Well, being healthy. Yeah, I know. What's that? And then people get a little confused. Well, exercise and diet. What diet? What exercise? Well, be strong, be flexible. Okay. What does that mean? So it's more than just say health is important. How do you quantify that? What does that actually mean to be healthy? And so that's kind of what I've done. On the physical realm, I like breaking it down so it's simple, so I can think about it better, and I can also teach people better. And so to me, being healthy, my definition of healthy is you can call me up and say, hey, let's go do a thing. And I don't ever have to say, no, I'm busy. What I'm really thinking is I'm not in shape enough to go do that thing. right? So health to me is I can go do whatever activities I want to do because my body is not going to be the stopping thing of that. And so I break that in sort of three pieces, and that is strength, cardiovascular fitness, and flexibility. If you're flexible and you have cardiovascular fitness and you have strength, then you're fit. That's what fitness really is. There is no other component of physical health. So it seems like if you read all the internet and you read all everybody's books, it seems way complicated. There's so many people's ideas and philosophies and all those kind of things. But at the end of the day, it's one of three things: strength, flexibility, or cardiovascular fitness. And as you know, people who really, really like strength, are not usually very cardiovascular fit or flexible. And people who really, really love cardiovascular fitness, God bless them, are not very strong and maybe not very flexible. And people who are yoga maniacs and always super flexible are not very strong. And so I think people get caught up in one of those three things and over focus on it and ignore the other two. And so my goal in my own life is to try and maintain all three of those things: flexibility, strength, and cardiovascular fitness. You think about what's the difference between an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old? Flexibility. Yeah. What's the difference between an old man with osteoporosis and a 24-year-old stud? Strength. What's the difference between a guy who can go on a hike for 2 hours in the mountains and a guy who says, I'll just stay in the car? Cardiovascular fitness. And so all three of those things in my life, at least, are important, especially because, as you know, I live in three places like that, right? I live in a place where I'm in the mountains, I live here, and I live on an ocean. And so I try and combine all three of those things together.
Yeah. I mean, what I loved about what you said at the very beginning was, diet. And you're like, what diet?
Yeah.
Strength.
Specifically.
What strength? Right. And it's like, for the listener, it's like, not enough people actually sit down and ask those questions of what is strength for you and the lifestyle you live. Like if you're a golfer,
very different.
Strength for you as a
hockey
golfer
player
is good, or a hockey player, or whatever your sport is.
I tell people this all the time.
Or pickleball.
So people are athletes, right? What's an athlete? A 320-pound, 6'7" offensive lineman for the Dallas Cowboys is an athlete. So is a 140-pound CrossFitter. Very different kinds of athletes, right? Very different kinds of athletes. So you can't just say it's an athlete. There's all kinds of athletes of different kinds. The golfer, the hockey player.
75-year-old golfer
exactly.
can be an athlete.
Yeah, jockeys, right? So there's all kinds of athletes. So that can't be the answer. So for you, what does fitness mean to you? We were talking about health. Health is broken down into fitness and health. So we're only on the fitness component of that because we haven't really talked about health yet, right? The healthy component of that, because I think it combines those two things. People don't think about that either. A lot of people think healthy is just being fit, but that's not true either, right? But in the fitness component, what does fitness mean? It means flexibility, strength, cardiovascular. And now how does that apply to your life? And if you are a 6'7", 320-pound offensive lineman, that's probably going to be different than me, right? Well, different than his teammate, the wide receiver. Wide receiver is doing completely different workout than he's doing, and should be. So you have to decide what is your thing. But all I would caution you is, in your quest to achieve fitness, don't forget the other two pillars that you don't really like as much, right? Because you're going to have a propensity to want to do one of the three, or the most two of the three. You probably are not thinking about all three. So kind of force yourself to also make sure you're doing the third one.
Yeah, and I've fallen into that too. Like strength was one of my key things back in the day. And,
me too.
And then I realized I couldn't run across the lawn and went, okay, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So now it's much more balanced.
Back in Special Forces, it was cardiovascular fitness, 100%, right? Rucking all the time, running all the time. I mean, I was a running guy. And then when I finished that and got into weightlifting, I kind of left all that behind and went completely all strength, right? And kind of forgot about that. So I went from one extreme to the other. That's why I'm the perfect person to say, don't do what I did. Kind of keep all three. I think that's important. So
you talking about fitness, and then on the health side, do you want to address the health side then?
So the health side for me is, what does it mean to be healthy? And so I kind of went, and, you know, we won't get too long. This is a whole podcast by itself. But in the health side, what does that mean? To me, it means vitality and energy, and being able to live a successful life where you feel good all the time, where you're never going to feel good all the time, where you feel good the majority of the time. Good. What does that mean? How do you break that down? And so then I broke it down by organs, because I'm obsessed with medicine, because I'm a doctor, right? I was obsessed with medicine long before I became a doctor. It's why I became a doctor. I was obsessed with health and fitness long before I became a doctor. So I said, all right, what does healthy eyes mean? And what would I have to do to maintain healthy eyes? What does healthy ears, hearing mean? And what would I have to do to maintain that? What does healthy oral mean? And what would I have to do to maintain that? What about a heart? What would I have to do? What about my liver? And I literally went organ system by organ system and said, what are the things I would have to do to maintain those things? What numbers do I need to meet? Right? Your blood work numbers, those kinds of things. What numbers are important? Blood pressure, pulse, lab work, hormones, all those things. And by organ system, because if you can go to a doctor, nutritionist, chiropractor, whoever you want to go to, and go, hey, what do I need to do to be healthy? And they'll give you an answer to that question. And not one of them is going to mention your eyes, because they don't think about eyes. But if you go to the ophthalmologist, he's only going to mention your eyes. Oh, you mean healthy in your eyes? And he's going to tell you about that. Well, who's the person thinking about all those things, right? And so I just kind of went organ system by organ system and said, if I were to ask somebody who's an expert in eyes, what do I need to do to maintain my vision and make sure I have good eye health and I don't go blind or need glasses earlier than I should, or whatever that is? What are the things I should be aware of and do? Good. And it's three things. And what are those three things? And good. Now, what do I need to do for the liver? What is three things? And there's only a couple things. It's not like a list of 40 things. It's 2 or 3 things in each organ system. When should I get a colonoscopy? When should I get cancer scanning? When should I get skin checks? There are preventive things that I can do to maintain health, but nobody's told me when I should do each of those things. And then all of a sudden you go, doctor, and I say, well, when's the last time you had a blah, blah, blah? And you're like, oh, what? You didn't even know that was a thing, right? No, we're not doing a good job of teaching people, here's how you stay healthy.
But you cover this in your book.
I do. Not at the, I have a chapter on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there needs to be, I've been wanting, I wish somebody would have, and I've looked and nobody has written that book. Where's the book that says, at 30, make sure you do these things. At 35, do these things. At 40, do these things. Or every 2 years, make sure you do this. Where is that book? How come nobody's written that book? It's not that hard. Yeah. I mean, AI could write it in 10 minutes, but we've just not taken the time to do that. So
it's a whole different conversation.
It's a whole different conversation.
But yeah. So thanks for sharing. It's good perspective. And especially those are the kinds of things that people avoid, or they don't think about, or they get so busy, and and this is the whole point about having more balance in your life and being able to take those time in the morning where you're doing the most important things versus the things that you get sucked into because you're running the treadmill.
If you're doing your morning routine, you look at your health and go, you know what? I haven't had a skin check in 2 years. I should probably make sure I don't have anything on my, skin cancer is the most preventable disease in the world, or you could die from it. Your choice. Super easy. They go in, they see it. No, you got one of the basal cells. We got to skin that off, or don't do anything about it and try to get a squamous cell and die. Your choice. Yeah.
That's a very good point. Yeah. So wealth. Do you mind chatting about that a little bit?
Sure. So again, I like to simplify things down. What is wealth? And there's a lot of philosophies on wealth, right? We can go Dave Ramsey, or we can go Robert Kiyosaki, who completely opposite disagree with each other. And the truth is, yes, this sells a lot of books. And yes, this sells a lot of books, and the truth's somewhere in here in the middle. But you can't, if you're going to write the book, you can't be in the middle guy. You got to be one philosophy or the other. But the reality is there's a lot to be gained from all of those. What I teach the Gladiator group and the Valkyrie group about wealth is this. I think the most important thing, and Robert Kiyosaki says this in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the most important thing is you have to decide its priority. Everybody wants to know the strategy, and nobody wants to talk about the philosophy, right? What's your strategy for gold? Good idea or bad idea? Well, the answer should be, it depends. What is your long-term goals? Because based on your long-term goals, I can tell you which strategies will get you there. But if I don't know where you're trying to get to, it's hard for me to tell you a strategy, right? It's hard for me to give you a map to get to New York if I don't know you're going to New York. And so I think people want to talk about strategies all the time. What do you think about, that stock that everybody's talking about? What do you think about Bitcoin? Well, those are strategies. It's not a philosophy. Philosophy is I'm here and I'm trying to get to here. Which strategies can I best use to get there? So I think there's a lot of talk with wealth about that. I'm assuming because they listen to you, the people on this podcast are probably a little more sophisticated financially than your average guy is.
That might be a gross assumption.
That might be a gross assumption.
I don't know.
I would guess just because it's a business podcast. These are business guys. I'm assuming they talk more about money than the average person would talk about money. But I'm going to start. So I don't want to offend anybody by being very basic. But if I were to be very basic, I would say, you start with saying, does my family have an emergency fund? That's where you start. If I were to lose my job tomorrow, or we couldn't do something, how long could we survive? So to me, wealth is not defined by how much money I have. Wealth is defined by how long could we survive if we lost our primary source of income. And so, am I 1 week wealthy? Am I 1 month wealthy? Am I 1 year wealthy? How long could we survive on the means of our own assets if we lost our primary source of income? And when you start thinking about wealth like that, because what is wealth? To me, wealth doesn't have anything to do with pieces of paper with dead presidents on them. Wealth has to do with time. What makes you the wealthiest is when you have time freedom. And so if a long time ago, I started thinking about money, or I started thinking about wealth, I would say not as money, but as time freedom. How do I have time freedom? And it doesn't mean money's not important. You still have to have money to do what I'm saying, but money doesn't become the thing that you're trying to get. It becomes the means to get what you're trying to get, which is time freedom, which is a spectacular lifestyle. My goal, the reason my book is called How to Live in Every Minute, How to Create a Spectacular Life, is my whole goal is to create a spectacular life. My goal is not to have a lot of money. I think you have to have some money in order to have a spectacular life, but you don't have to have $1 billion. That's a misnomer. In fact, if you have $1 billion, you won't be any happier than if you have $100 million. And you won't be any happier with $100 million than you will with 20 million. But you're going to need about 20. Now, you could probably be just happy with 10, but you get down to 1, it's going to get more difficult, right? So at some point, you're going to get all the happiness out of the money you can, and now it just becomes about the money. So you and I have a mentor. His name's Keith. And first time I ever met Keith, I was in Fiji, and we were sitting at a meeting. It was a very small meeting. And it's the first time I ever met him. I thought, geez, this guy's brilliant. And he's going on and on about, if you want to be rich, you have to do this. If you want to be rich, and I'm just writing. If you want to get rich, you got to do this. If you want to stay rich, you got to do this. And so when I take notes, I had this book, and when I take notes on the right-hand side, and I write my aha moments on the left-hand side. So that after the conference, if I want, I can just go back and look at my aha moments in the thing. That's how I take notes. I'm sitting there. I remember this to this day. This was 2008. I remember this to this day. I was sitting there and I was writing. If you want to get rich, you want to get rich, you want to get rich, you want to get rich. And I thought, and I stopped for a second. And I wrote on the left-hand side of the page, what if the goal isn't to get rich? what if the goal is to create a spectacular life? How would that change this? And changed my whole thinking about money that day, in that moment. And from then on, all of my thinking was, yeah, but what if I wanted to create a spectacular life? What if I wanted to have a house on a beach and a house in the mountains and a ranch? How much money would that take? Because that's a spectacular life. It doesn't take $1 billion, but it takes some. So it became about creating whatever it takes to create the spectacular life instead of let's see how much we can get. And so that changed my whole philosophy on wealth. And so I would argue that people should think about, what does wealth mean to you, the philosophy, and where are you trying to get to? And then let's talk about what strategies would get you there.
I think a lot of part too, and just for the listener is that, there is a piece wealth is, to your point, not about money. It's about where you're spending your time and how you're spending your time and how you have that freedom. And everybody wants to spend time differently. Some people want to cruise on a yacht,
100%.
10 weeks out of the year,
Yep.
and that takes a certain amount of money.
Travel around the world.
Right. But some people just want to have a small cottage and have their kids there and their grandkids or their family. And then that takes a different amount of money.
And you have to decide for you what that is, right? But it's way less than you think, because, social media, et cetera, would have you think you have to go get a whole bunch of money, but you don't. You have to get enough to create the spectacular life you want to live. And so people don't take the time because they get up and live the zombie life. They don't take time to think about that and think, well, what is it? What would be a spectacular life to me? Now I've defined that. What do I have to get that? And then make a plan to get there. Instead of what we do is get up in the morning and just say, go get as much as you can go get. Well, that doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, I think, to your point earlier about, our listeners, it's like, and I've done this before in business, and I'm sure you've done this before, is like you get caught up in a strategy or a whether it's a Bitcoin strategy or whether it's a business strategy, like, okay, we're going to develop this new product and we're going to drive 5 million in revenue out of it. Right. And it's like, and you just focus on the 5 million in revenue, but you're not really, well, what am I going to get out of the 5 million in revenue? And what's it going to cost me in the 5 million in revenue? And how does that affect my real wealth? Right. If it's like, well, if wealth to you is living at the cottage with your, with your grandkids and your children,
you're not going to be doing that.
But you're busy doing your business. And then you do that to your 60s or 70s and go, well, fuck, what was the point? And so I love this concept of really identifying what is your philosophy around wealth. What is wealth to you? What is it going to? What does the picture look like first? Then, and I'm assuming that then you look at the strategies to how you get to the philosophy.
Yeah, I asked. So I've done the financial freedom. I call it financial freedom. If you stand up in a group of, I've done this lecture all across the country, probably in 50, 60, 70 different forums. And I always start with this question: how many in here would like to be financially free? And everybody raises their hand except one liar, but he lies about other things too, right? And so and everybody raises their hand. And then I ask this question. It's amazing, Dwayne. You should see it. I think you've been there. I say, all right, what does that mean? Tell me what it means. And nobody raised their hand because nobody's even thought about it. Everybody loves the idea. Oh, I want some financial freedom. Oh, good. What does that mean to you? And then they'll say stupid things. All right, I don't tell them that then. But they say stupid things. Here's the stupid things. All my bills are paid. So if I pay all your bills, that's financial freedom? Yes. It really, you can just, that's all you want, it's just your bills paid. Well, no, because I hadn't thought about that. Or somebody says this: I never have to worry about money again. I said, wow. I said, you don't think Warren Buffett ever worries about money? You don't think Bill Gates ever worries about money? You don't think Elon Musk worries about money? Having financial freedom doesn't have anything to do with not worrying about money.
Right. Sometimes when you have more money, it's all you worry about because the job becomes so.
That's certainly been true for me.
It's so big.
Well, and you have to worry about different things. How am I going to keep people from taking this shit away from me? Right? How do I protect this? So you're saying I don't ever want to worry about money again doesn't even make any sense. The easiest way to not worry about money is go to prison. They don't worry about money at all. Right? They get up 3 meals. They have sex 3 times a week. They get to go to the gym every day. I mean, that's financial freedom.
That's right. Trade cigarettes.
Yeah. If you don't. Yeah. And so my point is, if you're out there and you're thinking to yourself, I'd like some financial freedom. Now I want to ask you, what do you think that means? And really be honest with yourself. What do you think it means? And that's where I came up with the idea. Well, financial freedoms to me means time freedom. That's financial freedom. What do I mean by that? Well, I can get very specific about that. I want to live in my house in Belize this month. So I want to live in my house in Jackson this month. And now I have a goal. And so once I've got to the place where I've got that goal, that's what I needed. I don't need 10 billion. That doesn't, if you put $10 billion in my checking account tomorrow, other than a jet, nothing would change in my life. Everything would be exactly the same because I'm living a spectacular life. I'm living exactly what I want to live right now. And so I just don't think it would change much. So I think that's important for people to understand. Especially I think it's important to people to understand if you're 30 or 25 or 35 or 40, because I wish I'd have thought about it better back then, or somebody would have told me that back then, instead of having to wait till I figured it out later on in my 40s and 50s.
Well, and I also do think, though, sometimes people in their 50s or 60s, they are not, which you used a really great word earlier in the podcast. You have to have grace with yourself to go, in your 50s or 60s, sometimes you flip the switch on yourself saying, well, I don't have what I thought I should have had. And then you measure yourself by that. And it's like, well, but what, again, you don't have a philosophy. Most people don't have a philosophy. And worst part, they don't talk about it with their significant other. So now you've got a double jeopardy problem.
You know why they don't have a philosophy? They don't do the 10 a.m. Mm-hmm. By the way, guys, we're not saying it has to be 10 a.m. We're saying there has to be a time where you're thinking about this stuff. Every day. Maybe not every day. 90% of the days. 90% of the days you take some time to think about the most important things. That's why they don't have a philosophy.
It could be 30 minutes a day.
Could be.
You could start with 30.
Little as you can do.
Yeah. If you're doing 30 a day
would be great.
Is going to get you 4 hours
and I
a week.
realize you're saying, well, God, it must be nice to have a career where you don't have to start your day till 10 o'clock. It is. But there were many, many years my ER shift started at 7 a.m. So I get it. But there's other times. It doesn't have to be in the morning. It could be an hour before you go to bed. It can be at lunch and you'll sit in your car. You can carve the time out. It doesn't have to be you have to have the time I have or the time you have, because we didn't always have those times either.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about too is it's called discipline. It's creating the discipline to focus your energy in an area where it's most important versus, you are just being trapped in the waves.
Here's what I've learned, and I'm obsessed with time management. I have a time management, my own planner I invented. It's Planner Journal. You guys should go to livingeveryminute.com and get you one. And the 6 pillars are in there. It teaches you what to do every day with them. But I only give that little advertisement because of this. In all of my obsession about time management, I've looked at all the systems and all the planners and bought all the stuff because I always have had this weird obsession with it. Here's the thing I've learned. If I were going to summarize it in one sentence, what is the most important thing I could be doing right now? What's it? What's the most important thing I could be doing right now? Because there's always going to be a list of 30 things I could be doing right now. And there's never time to do everything, but there's always time to do the most important thing.
Actually, I'm going to put in a plug, not because it's a plug for you, but it's a plug for the listeners in that. So like Tim just described, go to livingeveryminute.com, get get the time management system, not because it's the greatest time management system in the world, because it's a great time management system that everybody needs.
It's not a calendar.
Yeah. If you don't have one, you need one.
Yeah. So I will tell you, it's not a calendar. Use Google for that. It's not a, hey, when do I have an appointment at 2:00 on Thursday? That's not what it is. It's a system that guides you through this process I'm talking about every morning. The planner literally guides you through it. There's a page every day. It's a writing, because the science says you writing it down is very different than you getting out your iPhone. Trust me, I use planning systems on my iPhone. It's very different when you have to get down. You write it out every day, and you go through and it literally guides you through the thing. You write your what you're grateful for today, what your top 10 goals are today, what's the most important thing that could happen today. And then there's the health, wealth pillars that we just talked about. What's one thing in each of those pillars I'm going to do today? Imagine if you said health, wealth, relationships, right? Abundance, sharpening the sword, and you took one thing today that you're going to do in each of those pillars, and you did that every single day for your life. What would your life look like 10 years from today? Well, that's what the planner helps you to do.
Fuck, what would it look like 6 months
What would it look like a month from now?
Yeah,
honestly.
it would be
and
game
so
changer.
if you do that every single day, so all the planner is a system to which guides you to help you do that. It's not a, when are my meetings next week? That's not what I'm talking about.
No.
Yeah.
And to me, it's the importance of that structure and process every day, of the discipline of exercising it. And then, you could argue, well, once you ingrain something to become such a habit for such a period of time, like gratitude is a really good example for me in my life. It's like there's not a day that does not go by that I don't do a gratitude flood. But I've created a system. Like, I have a process.
It's a habit now.
I know exactly when it gets done. It's before I fall asleep. I do a gratitude flood for like 2 or 3 minutes now. I used to do it longer because it took longer, because it wasn't.
Well, you fall asleep faster now because you're older.
Right. But it's a process that I have. And so this is an important piece, I think, guys, if you're listening to this, is that if you don't have a process to ingrain what Tim is talking about here,
you won't do it.
You won't do it.
Or you'll do it for a minute.
Or you'll do it for, I'll listen to the podcast and then I'll do it for a day or 2 days.
Motivated
or maybe,
for a week.
Maybe you get 7 days out of it and then it falls apart.
It's got to become a habit. The best way to have a habit is to have a tool that helps you keep that habit. That's why you invented it.
Yep. And then once you get off the habit.
I did it for myself. Honestly, I did it for myself. I used all the systems and none of them did that. All of them was about what are the most important things I have to get done this week. But none of them included the most important things. That included the areas of life that are most important. They were to-do lists. And this is not a to-do list.
And your system prompts questions. Yes. So that's to me, that's the powerful piece of it, is like it prompts the questions to get you thinking about it. It's not a to-do list where, I got to do a breathing exercise today, or I got to meditate today. Well, that's not the point.
And so it's so funny because we had no intention of talking about this. No. It's weird that we're here in this place, but I will mention one of our cool thing we've done with it is some of the days, so there's a page for every day, and some of the days now have a QR code, and you click the QR code and it takes you to a YouTube video with us talking about this kind of very thing. So we may use some of this on our QR codes in the planner, which would be really cool, some of this podcast.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that was in there. Oh, that's awesome. All right, let's relationships. It's the third pillar.